The Apocrypha of John, also known as the Secret Book of John, stands as one of the most significant texts in the Gnostic tradition of early Christianity. Composed likely in the late 1st or 2nd century, this treatise presents an alternative narrative of creation and redemption, distinctively different from the canonical Christian account. In this text, John, the beloved disciple of Jesus, is grappling with doubts following the crucifixion of his master. In his moment of uncertainty, he receives a revelation from the risen Christ, unveiling the mysteries of the divine realm, the origins of humanity, and the nature of evil. This revelation offers a complex cosmogony involving a supreme, unknowable God, intermediate divine beings, and a flawed lower creator God, often identified as the demiurge, who is responsible for the material world. The Apocrypha of John, found in multiple copies among the Nag Hammadi scriptures discovered in 1945, underscores the diversity of early Christian thought. Its dualistic vision, contrasting the spiritual and material realms, and its critique of the Old Testament deity have been both sources of fascination for scholars and reasons for its rejection by Orthodox Christianity. Today, this text serves as a testament to the rich tapestry of religious exploration in the early centuries of the Common Era, inviting readers to delve into the esoteric beliefs and spiritual quests of the Gnostics. I am the Desert Viking, and I am happy and pleased to begin this next segment of the Builder's Workshop with you, where we will discover the Apocrypha of John as we go through an introductory text and then delve in later episodes into the texts of the Apocrypha itself. I look forward to seeing where this takes us. All right, as I alluded to, we're going to be going over the Apocrypha of John. Now, in digging around through my library, the book I just read you from was the introduction to that version of the Apocrypha of John. I also have this book, which is the Nag Hammadi Scriptures, which contains a good amount of information, some of which overlaps some of the other books that I have. Also has the Apocrypha of John, and I like the language in this one better, so I'm going to be using this one to read from. Just be aware, like with any versions of the Bible, which these are books from the Bible that were removed, that you will find different translations, and you will find different wording, different ways that they're composed. It's kind of like the King James version of the Bible versus the NIV version. One's more modern than the other. Also, I'd like to point this out. So these texts, I believe, were deciphered, translated from Coptic Egyptian. Coptic Egyptian is much like Hebrew or Greek, codified language, which means that the values of the words, the values of the letters, have numeric meaning. And part of the holy text was finding the words that were equivalent to other words to crack a code. Now, I know from my own studies, the book of Revelations, which was written roughly the 1st century, was written in such a coded manner. So I have no doubt that these also were written in a similar fashion, and thus being translated into English, all of those codes have been destroyed. So if you want to get the full benefit out of these texts, you're going to have to learn you some Coptic Egyptian. So easy, right? Everyone can do that. It's just something to think about. So I'm going to read the introduction in this episode today from both of the books, just to give you a background of what we're about to read. And the Apocrypha of John itself is not a very long read, so we'll cover that in a few episodes. Go ahead and sit back, and I'm going to read to you the introduction of the Secret Book of John. Discovered in the Berlin Gnostic Codex 8502 in 1896, but not published until 1955, the Secret Book or Apocrypha of John is probably the most widely known of all the Sethian treatises. Sethian being a flavor of Gnosticism. The other more popular version of Gnosticism being Valentinian, which was named after the bishop who basically ran it, Valentinus. The popularity and importance of the Secret Book of John in antiquity is clearly evident. It now survives in no fewer than 4 separate manuscripts, a huge number of copies compared with what we have for most Gnostic texts. We have 2 manuscripts, Nag Hammadi Codices 2 and 4, contain a somewhat longer version of the Secret Book of John, while the other 2, Nag Hammadi Codex 3 and the Berlin Gnostic Codex 8502, contain somewhat shorter versions. All 4 codices contain other writings, but in the 3 Nag Hammadi codices, the Secret Book of John is always the first tractate copied into the codex. In Against Heresies 1.29, the late 2nd century anti-Gnostic Christian bishop Irenaeus summarized a work very similar to the first part of the Secret Book of John. Although Irenaeus attributed this work to certain Gnostics, in quotes, a later version of Irenaeus' report by the same title, Against Heresies 2, falsely attributed to Tertullian, ascribed this work to certain Sethians. Sethians, again, being a popular version of the Gnostics. And Theodoret of Cyrus, Summary of Heretical Fables 13, identified these Gnostics as Barbalites. I might have a little hard time pronouncing that word. In addition, in his next chapter, in Against the Heresies 1.30, Irenaeus summarizes a work that features a revision of Genesis 1-1 through 9, quite similar to the second part of the Secret Book of John, attributing it to certain others, in quotes, whom Pseudo-Tertullian in Against All Heresies 2 first identified as Ophites, and Theodoret in the Summary of Heretical Fables 1.14 later identified also as Sethians, although the heavenly Seth plays a role only in the Secret Book of John. According to Frederick Weiss, one of the editors of the Standard Synopsis of the Secret Book of John, all 4 manuscripts, Nag Hammadi Codices 2, 3, and 4, and the Berlin Gnostic Codex of the Secret Book are copies of independent translations into Sahidic Coptic from earlier Greek exemplars. One a shorter and the other a longer version, both of which the originals are now lost. The versions in Codices 2 and 4 are independent Coptic recensions of a previous Coptic translation of the original longer Greek version, and the shorter version contained in Codex 3 and the Berlin Codex are independent translations of a single Greek exemplar of the shorter version. Aside from the question of the relationship of these 2 or 3 recensions of the Secret Book of John to be a Barbalite theogony and cosmogony summarized by Irenaeus, there is also the question of the relative priority among all these versions of the underlying myth, not only Irenaeus' account, but also that of both the 2 longer 2 and 4 and the 2 shorter versions, 3 in the Berlin, of the Secret Book of John. At present, this issue has not been decided, although it is obvious that even the material common to both the long and short versions represent a text that has undergone substantial redaction and incorporated a number of separate sources, such as the introductory negative theology and a short dialogical treatise on the salvation of various sorts of souls. The longer versions differ from the shorter ones principally in their inclusion of the long citation from the Book of Zoroaster and a hymnic monologue spoken by Forethought as a conclusion for the entire work. Although much of the material found in the Secret Book of John, arguably the earliest complete version of the Sethian myth, in quotes, is echoed in other Sethian treatises, the concluding Forethought monologue seems actually to have served as the inspiration for the cosmoposition of an entire Sethian treatise, namely 3 forms of first thought. One may accordingly conjecture that the shorter recension of the Secret Book of John, including the short excursus on the destiny of various sorts of souls, came into existence around 150 of the Common Era, in the form of a dialogue between the resurrected Christ and his disciple John, son of Zebedee. The longer version in Codices 2 and 4 was created basically by the addition of the extended angelic malathesia of the earthly Adam's material body from the Book of Zoroaster, and the inclusion of the Forethought monologue at the end of the work, and may have been completed during the last quarter of that 2nd century. One may also conjecture a still earlier non-dialogical version consisting of the theogonic and cosmological material common to the Secret Book of John, Irenaeus' Against Heresies, and 3 forms of first thought, which may represent the earliest recoverable form of the Secret Book of John. The secret book contains what purport to be secret teachings revealed by Christ in a post-resurrection appearance to the Apostle John, the son of Zebedee. It thus constitutes a continuation of the fourth gospel, whose farewell dialogues between the pre-crucifixion Jesus and his uncomprehending disciples Peter, Thomas, and Philip concerning Jesus' promised return to the Father are now supplemented by John's post-ascension encounter with the very Savior who had indeed returned to the Father just as he had predicted. The veiled references to the many rooms of his Father's house to which the earthly Savior had promised to take his followers are now described in detail, and the unity between the Father and the Son is now clarified. Jesus is the Father, Mother, and Son. Indeed, in his primordial capacity as the Blessed Mother Father, Christ had already raised up the seed of Seth to the Father's many-roomed house, namely the four eternal realms or eons, which he himself had previously prepared before this world had ever come to be. In contrast to a future parousia at the end of days envisioned by John 21 and the Johannine letters, the secret book of John portrays this parousia as occurring shortly after the events described in the Gospel, and in effect challenges the leadership role John 21 assigns to Peter by having the post-ascension Jesus appoint John as the teacher of his fellow disciples. Christ's ensuing lengthy discourse, punctuated at certain points by John's request for clarification, consists of two parts: the Savior's lengthy monologue on theogony and cosmogony, and a subsequent dialogue between John and the Savior on anthropogony and soteriology. According to Michael Waldstein, with respect to its rapprochement with Jewish Genesis traditions, the first part tells of pre-Genesis realities and events about which Moses provides no information, and the second offers a rereading of Genesis books 1 through 7. With respect to its rapprochement with Platonic traditions, especially Plato's Timaeus, the Jewish creator God is split into an upper God of pure goodness, who is personally identified as the transcendent God of Middle Platonic theology, who retains some central features of the God of Israel, and an evil lower God, who is personally identified as the God of Israel, but is portrayed as a parody of the Platonic demiurge. In the first part, Christ reveals to John the nature of the supreme deity, the primal divine triad, Father, Mother, and Child. The divine realm brought into being by him, the all, or the pleroma of light, organized into four luminaries, Harmozal, Oriel, Devayathai, and Elilith, and its relation to the created order, how the creation with its flaws and shortcomings originated through the fall of Sophia, or wisdom, and the creation of the lower worlds at the hand of her ill-begotten son, Yaldabaoth, and his demonic underlings, and became dominated by the inferior powers that now control it. This part concludes with Yaldabaoth's boast, "I am a jealous god, and there is no other god beside me," which marks the point of transition to the second part of the revelation, a dialogue wherein Christ makes the first of many textual allusions to Genesis. What makes the work distinctively Sethian is the understanding of the four luminaries as the respective aeonic dwellings of the archetypal Adam, Seth, his primordial seed, the 7 Sethite generations from Seth through Noah, and Seth's post-Diluvian progeny. The second part of the secret book of John contains Christ's explanation of the true meaning of Genesis 1 through 9, revealing how Yaldabaoth created Adam as an initially weak copy, not yet spiritual, of the image of the archetypal human projected below from the divine world. John then asks the first of 10 questions, introducing an element of dialogue not found in the first part, and the subject matter shifts from theogony and cosmogony to soteriology and anthropogeny. This part goes on to reveal how Adam acquired his true spiritual nature and was enlightened by insight, epinoia, appearing in the form of the spiritual Eve, and by eating of the tree of knowledge was expelled from paradise and begot Seth. After a short dialogue of the salvation of various types of souls from the incarnational cycle and on the origin of the wicked spirit, Christ's revelation concludes with the story of Yaldabaoth's further enslavement of the human race through the origination of fate, the coming of the flood, and, note the reverse of the biblical order, how intercourse between the angels and human women led to humanity's sexual enslavement. The Savior then departs to the Aeonic world with a reminder that salvation is certain, since the Divine Mother has already enlightened her seed. In the long monologue, Concluding the longer version of the Secret Book of John, in Codices 2 and 4, Forethought Pronia Barbelo narrates in the first person her 3 salvific descents into the world of darkness to awaken her seed from their heavy sleep, induced by the archonitic powers, and to elevate them into the supernal light by sealing them with 5 seals. Several Sethian treatises present this final act of deliverance as a baptismal rite. The Holy Book of the Great Invisible Spirit, 3 Forms of First Thought, Melchizedek, the Revelation of Adam, Zostrianus, and perhaps Marcineus, usually called the 5 Seals. The 3 Forms of First Thought, the longer version of the Secret Book of John, the Holy Book of the Great Invisible Spirit, and the untitled text of the Bruce Codex. Thus, the ultimate restoration of Seth's progeny, who continue to live on earth, will be accomplished in the last days. Its advent is marked by Barbelo's final act of raising up her seed by appearing either in her own person or in that of her child, the Word or autogenous, the self-generated, or Seth or Christ, or other similar figures, to reveal to the Sethians of those days, that is, the contemporary readers of the secret book, the true account of their spiritual origin and nature. All right. Again, we're going to be reading from the Nag Hammadi Scriptures, Secret Book of John. That was the introduction. It's a lot to unpack, and it's not casual reading by any sort. I apologize for the butchering of some of the words that I don't ever use on a regular basis, and that was the first time I've seen some of those, so my vocabulary has grown through butchering of those words. So when we meet again, we will be delving into the actual Secret Book of John to see what it tells us. So in the interim, I want you to think about, maybe go out, you can do some research on some Gnostics. Look up Sethian Gnosticism versus Valentinian Gnosticism. Those were the 2 in favor. This is a Sethian book, and the Sethian versions speak more to myself, but again, that's just me and my own personal path. All right. Thank you for tuning in. Thanks for watching. If you liked it, give me a like and a subscribe. And next time, we will be getting into the Secret Book of John itself and its content. Until then, stay safe, peace profound, and we'll see you soon.